Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't had the chance to do so far, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'm planning to drop a lot more content that's related to applying for medical school, specifically MD-PhD programs, and especially with the current situation, I'm planning to release a whole slew of videos that are kind of like the one that I'm dropping right now. Another video that I have planned that should be coming out pretty soon is related to general tips when applying to MD-PhD or medical school programs. So I know right now it's almost June, and at this point most of you already have your GPA, your MCAT, your extracurriculars, all those factors set in stone, and probably the thing that is the biggest priority or the most concerning right now is finishing your personal statement and getting that ready for the start of the application cycle. So I did drop a video talking about this previously, but that one was sort of off the top of my head. And in this video, I'm planning to go a little bit more in depth. I'm actually going to pull up my own personal statement and go through that block by block or paragraph by paragraph to just give you an idea of the things that I thought were helpful in getting what I wanted to say across to the audience, to the admissions committee, and making sure that they saw me as someone who was very driven, motivated, and also able to succeed in medical school. So I'm actually going to go over two personal statements. The first one is my own, and the second one will be my wife's personal statement for her PA school application. In my opinion, the two prompts, the one for medical school and the one for PA school, they're pretty similar. And so I think the factors that make a medical school personal statement stand out will also be applicable to a PA school personal statement. Now, in the previous video, I talked about two core components. I talked about having an intellectual component and an emotional component. And so in this video, I'm going to do a better job of explaining what that is exactly. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so the prompt here is use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. And I think a good approach to have whenever you're writing these personal statements is to take every single prompt and break that into smaller sub-questions or sub-prompts. So for me, my approach to this was to break this into basically four fundamental questions. The first one is, why do you want to go into medicine? So basically, like, what circumstances or what aspects of life have inspired you specifically to pursue this path, right? So that's the first one. I think the second thing that you kind of have to address is why medicine? Why do people talk about how they want to help people or how they want to treat disease, right? But there's a lot of things that you can do to do those things. So for example, if your goal is to treat disease or improve health conditions for people, you could get into scientific research and figure out, new therapies, new scientific approaches that could advance the ways that we can treat and diagnose some of these diseases. Other possibilities include getting to public health and having a more societal level understanding of the impacts of disease and ways to alleviate that burden on society. So there's a lot of different approaches, right? But in this statement, you're trying to explain why do you want to address these healthcare factors as a physician, as a practicing physician. Okay, so that's the second sub-prompt in my opinion. And now the third thing sort of is, what do you know about the field of medicine? And then the fourth thing is can you show personal qualities that will make you a successful medical student and, in the long term, a successful doctor. Now you want whoever is reading the statement to think in their head, this person is someone who I can see coming to medical school and being not only successful in medical school, but who can go on and provide excellent care for their patients. One thing that came up on the interview trail for me, one thing I remember people saying is that how in a couple years, couple decades from now, they'll be the people who will go out and need to seek medical care, and the people that they're recruiting right now, the incoming medical students, will be the people who will take care of them in the future. And so they want to see you as someone who they personally will feel comfortable with. Now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and take a look at my personal statement. Okay, so I think the first paragraph should be something that captures the reader's attention, some sort of narrative hook. In mine, I talked about an experience that I had with my siblings. So my siblings have this rare neurogenetic disorder, and I tried conveying a story that kind of summarized my own personal feelings about being in that situation, about seeing what they were going through. Okay, so I go ahead and I write, As I looked into his eyes, a powerful desire to help overcame me. The feeling was strong, filling my heart with a sensation I could not describe, except perhaps as an emotional baptism. So with that, I'm trying to create, with that, my goal is to create a very engaging first sentence or two that didn't fully give away what I was talking about. With just these two sentences, you don't know the full scope of what's going on, and it forces you almost to go and read more into the paragraph so that you could understand what the context of this is. All right, so that was my hook. I had simply walked into the room, reset the settings on his feeding pump, but then once again, I was reminded of how little I could do to actually help him. All right, so with this, I've kind of set up that emotional connection that I have to medicine. It's obviously through my brother, but then I think that last sentence there is also important because over here, I'm showing the reader, right? I'm not outright saying it, but it's sort of, you can kind of read between the lines there that, okay, I want to do more, but I don't know how, and I don't know what I can do at this point. Okay, so then the second paragraph, that's where I take this narrative and I actually go ahead and explain it in a more technical manner. So I talk about how this moment that I had, it was, it's a part of my normal everyday life, being exposed or growing up around siblings who have a very rare genetic disorder. And I briefly talk about that. And and I think the main takeaway from this is this feeling of helplessness that I experience where I want to help, but I just don't know how. And then ultimately, in that last sentence, I talk about how this desire to help and improve their condition naturally led me to biomedical research. And ultimately, I dedicated about, at that point, 5 years of my life to research. But what I realized was that a lifelong career that is solely restricted to the lab is unsatisfying. And I think this part right here is very important, especially if you're an MD-PhD applicant, where you need to demonstrate that there is some need to go into medicine and not just pursue the PhD by itself and not just go into research by itself, right? You have to demonstrate that there is a desire to practice clinically. And that's what I think is the value of this sentence. That's why I structured it this way. That's why I placed this here. All right, now in this next paragraph, in the third paragraph, I talk about the lack of satisfaction that I had with just doing research. And it's because of what I saw with my siblings' physicians, who obviously had a significant impact on their care and who obviously were there for my parents. And so I talk about how being there and witnessing the impact that a physician could have on a family is something that I sincerely appreciated. And it also, for me personally, that's what fostered a desire for me personally to practice medicine. And I guess what I want to highlight here is that, I have not said that I specifically want to become a doctor because I saw this and that. My goal here and what I've been trying to do up until this point is to show that to the reader. So just by reading this, you get that idea in the back of your head that, okay, this person, they have a very good solid reason for getting into this field. Up until this point, I've been talking about the emotional component, why I want to get into medicine, what emotionally is driving me towards medicine. Okay, so for the next part, now I'm talking about my healthcare experiences. I talk about my experience in an organization called Health Leads. Learned how to talk to patients. I also spent time shadowing physicians as they sat in rounds and sought to understand their patients, not as a set of symptoms to be classified, but as individual personal lives that would play into their care. Okay, so here I'm showing the reader, I'm not just trying to do this because I heard someone talk about it, right? Or it's just something I read about. No, I've been there, I was in the clinic, and I saw exactly what these doctors were doing. Towards the end of this paragraph, I talk about how I really enjoyed the problem-solving and analytical nature of medicine. And this is something that appealed to my science-loving personality. So now I'm kind of moving from that initial emotional argument that I had to a more intellectual one, where I'm demonstrating and understanding what medicine is and why it appeals to me as a profession, right? I'm not just in this to help people. I actually like how I'm there talking to the patients. I like the problem-solving aspects of medicine, the everyday aspects of clinical care that you need to do as a physician. I also think that this part right here, where my cursor is right now, I think this is also a very important part of my statement. So I wrote, through these experiences, I discovered that my desire for medicine, while primarily rooted in the love that I have for my siblings, could extend beyond them as well. And I think this is important whenever you have a personal story that's driving you towards medicine. That can't be your only reason for going to medicine. You're going to work with patients who obviously are not your family and friends. And you're going to work with patients who have all sorts of different conditions and symptoms that are not related to your main disease of interest. So given that, can you handle that? Can you be in the clinic every day and work with patients from all these different diverse backgrounds who have all sorts of different medical conditions? Because you're going to have to do that throughout your training, especially in your third year of medical school. I think my goal here was to establish that, first of all, I would like to do that, and second of all, that I could do that. And I also think this part is important, where I say that medicine is not something that I want to do in the naive hopes of finding some kind of magic cure for my siblings, but because I genuinely want to improve the health of severely ill patients. So the reason I think that part is important is because a lot of us, especially those who have these very personal motives for getting into medicine, it's very easy to go into it and say that I want to cure this, or I want to work with these patients and improve their lives. Obviously, that's something that's very difficult to do. And I think from the perspective of an admissions committee member, I want to make sure that this person is prepared for the reality of medicine, and in my case, as an mdPhD applicant, for the realities of scientific research. You can't just come across a magic cure. So, if that is something that you're writing about, I think you should show that you have a practical, very realistic understanding of what you're getting into. All right, now for this final paragraph. So up until this point, my goal was to show the reader what I was thinking in my head and sort of to have them fill in the blanks. But now for this final part, my goal here is to basically take what I've shown before and explicitly state that to the reader. So I say, I recognize the trauma and suffering of not only the patients, but their families as well. Ultimately, I hope to directly work with these patients and help alleviate their suffering by overseeing their care. All right, so now I've taken what I've shown and I'm telling the reader exactly what I want to do in the future. In the same manner my siblings' physicians have impacted their lives. Then I go on to say, I also realize the road is long and strenuous. So I'm saying, I know this is something, I'm getting into something that's difficult. However, I remain strongly motivated by my personal background and experiences. So I know that this road, that becoming a doctor, becoming an MD, PhD is a very long road. It's going to be very difficult, but I've been motivated thus far, and I will be motivated. I will continue to be motivated. I'm not someone who's just going to quit at the first sign of adversity. I know what it is like to be on the other side, to constantly ask questions when a loved one is in pain. And so this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about showing the reader how you're someone who can be a good physician. So here I'm showing the reader that I can definitely make this emotional connection with what my patients will be going through, because I've been there myself, right? And I'm really humanizing myself here. It is those very questions, or I know what it's like to be on the other side, to constantly ask questions when a loved one is in pain. It is those very questions that inspired me to seek the answers and be able to directly apply them. Here, what I'm doing is I'm taking the emotional component and the intellectual component, this idea of asking questions, scientific questions, and being able to apply them. So now I tie those two components in together. And then finally, I have my closing last few sentences. Growing up, I often wondered how to help my siblings, parents, and others like them. After experiencing both the scientific and clinical aspects of medicine, I know my answer. So now I've shown the reader all my personal motivations, but now I'm explicitly telling them that after everything that I've been through, after everything that I've seen, and all the clinical and research experiences that I have, that I know, and I strongly believe that I can be a good physician, and that medicine is the answer for me. Okay, so that's it for my personal statement, and I hope that helps show how to take sort of that emotional component and that intellectual component and tie it together, where you're showing, where you're showing kind of like a personal connection to medicine, something that motivates you, but then you also confirm that you like the day-to-day aspects of a physician. All right, so now let's go back and look at this checklist that I made and make sure that I address each one of these points. So the first one was why medicine specifically, and I guess the second one was sort of related to that. Why not other specialties that can help people? So I think in that third paragraph that I had, where I talked about the doctors who came into my life, or I guess my family's life, and helped out, I show my personal connection to that and how I was able to see what the doctors were doing, right? So I showed that I was interested in doing that exact thing and being in their shoes at some point in my life. And the second part was where I go out and I start shadowing and I engage in these clinical experiences. And I talk about how I want to be in that situation. Well, first of all, I show how I've been in that situation where I'm talking to patients directly. and I learned how to provide extended care for these clients. And then I talk about how I shadowed physicians and I saw like what they were doing in their rounds, and how they approach their patients. And that's something that I definitely want to do. I want to do that exact thing. So that's how I address those first 2 points. A third point, what do you know about medical school and medicine? And so I kind of talk about that here. So I show that I have an understanding of medicine. I also, when I refer to like that long, strenuous road, I talk about, that's showing that I understand what the training process will be. And the fourth point is, can you show personal qualities that will make you successful? I think what I really tried showing is personal motivation. So that lets the reader know that this person is super motivated to do medicine, and more likely than not, they will do whatever they can to achieve that goal. I showed an understanding of the problem-solving and analytical nature of medicine that appeals to my science-loving personality. So I'm someone who's going to enjoy learning what I will learn in medical school. Then also here, I say, I learned how I could sit in a clinic, listen to the ordeals of a complete stranger, and strive to improve their health. So I'm showing that I can be in that position as a doctor who's listening to someone who's someone I probably I'm meeting for the first time. And I'm going to be sympathetic to them and and try my best to understand what they're going through and help them in any way possible. Okay, so a concern that some of you might have is, well, what if I don't have that kind of story where someone in my family is sick? What if I'm just interested in medicine? I had some experiences. I realized that this is something that I really want to do. It's something I'm super motivated for, but it's because I volunteered in the clinic or I shadowed it. And so for that reason, I'm actually going to pull up my wife's PA school statement to show you how you can still sort of make these intellectual and emotional connections to medicine without needing a family-centric story like the way I had it. Okay, so let's just go ahead and take a look at this personal statement and see how my wife was able to get those points across. In the first paragraph here, it's kind of similar to what I did, right? It's a narrative hook point where you're kind of telling a story, a very interesting story that captures the reader's attention. I could hear the floor creaking from my mom's footsteps as she approached my room. Right, that first sentence there, it's kind of a hook, right? Because you don't know exactly what's going on, and you're kind of forced to continue reading so that you can figure out exactly what's happening in the story. My eyes shifted from my book and I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I could not resist turning the page. The mystery needed to be solved first. So over here, she interjects a key point that she kind of comes back to later on in the personal statement. But this idea is introduced early on to the reader. The mysterious life of Detective Nancy Drew. As I read these stories, I imagined myself in her shoes, finding clues and using them to solve the case. This passion stuck with me throughout my life. Due to the problem-solving nature instilled in me by my fascination with mysteries, I was naturally drawn to science and medicine. However, instead of figuring out the culprit behind a murder, I was eager to understand the natural world around me. So that right there was really important because she showed these personal traits that she has. She is someone who loves mysteries, and that love of mysteries and trying to understand the world around her is what drew her to science and medicine. And so that right there is her emotional connection to medicine. Notice how she's not connecting it to a patient the way I did it. Her connection is still emotional, right? It's like still something like a personality trait that she has, but it's different. It's just like it's her love of mystery. All right, and then she goes on, my passion for knowledge led me to enroll and excel in courses in the biological sciences during my undergrad career. I generally enjoy the detective work required to take what I learned from my textbook and apply to clinical scenarios. This is where I began to develop an interest in medicine. So now she's talking about her journey towards medicine. And if you go back to my personal statement, I forgot to mention this, but I kind of did the same thing. Talked about my siblings early on, and then that was like my inspiration, my starting point. And then I talked about the actual clinical experiences that I had and the scientific experiences that I had, which ultimately allowed me to decide that medicine was the right fit for me. So over here, she's kind of starting to do that. She also volunteered at Health Leads. She goes on to talk about a specific patient, right? It broke my heart to see how many patients never sought out these resources due to lack of awareness. As a provider, I'll be cognizant of the barriers to health and continue to advocate for my patients. So for those of you who don't know, Health Leads is an organization. I don't think it's still active, but back when it was active, the goal was to connect patients from low socioeconomic backgrounds to resources in the community that could be affecting their health, such as food, shelter, transportation. So here she kind of goes back into the emotional component, right? She is like recognizing all these things that are going on with these patients and she really wants to help. Then she continues to talk about her engagement in more hands-on clinical care as a patient technician, scribe, and research assistant. Took social and family histories. I developed my critical thinking and analytical skills. I worked closely with interprofessional teams and genuinely enjoyed it. So now she's talking about like all these of being a PA that she really enjoys. These are not necessarily emotional things that she enjoys, but she just likes working in the field and making these, being a part of an interprofessional team, applying critical thinking and analytical skills. So she's taking those components about the profession and talking about how that's something that she really likes doing. Okay, and then she goes on to talk about, during this time I shadowed medical professionals. I noticed that everyone on the medical team played a different but crucial role in patient care. I was intrigued by the level of autonomy given to PAs, because remember, this is a PA school essay. When it came to treating and managing their patients, I was unfamiliar with the career, so I looked into it more, discovered that PAs can work as primary care providers and attend to diverse medical problems, especially those pertaining to underserved communities, right? So here, she's taking the underserved part. So it's something that she kind of found out about the profession and connecting it back to that emotional component of like wanting to help the underserved, which she talked about after discussing her health leads experience. I recognize my interest in a specialty can evolve, and for this reason, the fluidity of the career is an appealing factor. It soon became apparent that the profession reflected my goals as a future medical provider. So here she talks about A, how she learned about PA school, and B, how she realized that it allowed her to do the things that she wanted to do to help the underserved. And then she talks about other components of the field that appeal to her. I cannot narrow down my one life-changing moment that suddenly sparked my interest to become a PA. My passion stems from a multitude of experiences. They all collectively shape my path. It's not always about knowing the recipe to a cure. It takes patience, dedication, and a little detective work. So now she has this theme going on about detective work, and she connects it back to that theme, that emotional component, her emotional theme that's running throughout this essay. These past few years, I observed PAs not only address the clinical needs of the patient, but provide hope to those who had given up. I am confident that becoming a PA is a career that is well suited for me, and it's how I want to spend the rest of my life. I will treat them with compassion and have the scientific and clinical education to diagnose and treat them. I am eager to begin the journey. So that is really good, because it shows, it kind of, it addresses all the points, the statement addresses all the points that I had listed before. So let's go back and look and run through that checklist real quick. So she talks about, so we're going to adapt this. So why PA school specifically, and why not other specialties that can help people? She talks about how she learned about what a PA does, and how those specific things about being a PA appeal to her, such as the career mobility, right? That's something that really appealed to her. She didn't go out of her way to say, this is why I want to do PA school and not become a doctor, but like she talked about specifically the pros of being a PA and why there are things that she wants to do. So you don't have to put down other professions. You specifically talk about why this specific profession is something that really appeals to you. What do you know about PA school and being a PA? She talked about how PAs play a crucial role in patient care. They have a level of autonomy in treating and managing their own patients. They can attend to diverse medical problems, especially those pertaining to underserved communities. She's showing like how much she knows about what PAs do. And then I think this fourth point was very well done in this essay. Can you show personal qualities that will make you successful? So remember, she had that whole theme of that love for mysteries that's running throughout this essay, and that's that emotional component, which shows her desire to solve problems, and so that is showing that critical aspect, the critical thinking aspect that would serve her well as a PA student and as a PA. I also really like this part here. It's kind of subtle, but she says, my passion for knowledge led me to enroll and excel in courses in the biological sciences. So this is sort of saying, hey, you know what? I'm academically qualified. I excelled in my courses. Not only did I enjoy them, but I did really well in them. And also here, this is also an important statement. This experience helped me see myself in the role of the medical provider who understands patients as holistic beings and not just as problems to solve. I will be cognizant of these barriers to health and continue to advocate for my patients. So that right there is showing someone who understands the trauma that some of these patients go through, who will be able to connect with them, and who is aware of some of the socioeconomic factors that they're affected by. And this goes back to that fourth point. Are you showing personal qualities that will make you a good healthcare provider? Here's another thing that she says that really helps put her in the mind of the reader as someone aware of these issues and who will take those into account when treating patients. Remember, I said that when the reader is going through these essays, by the end of it, they should see you as someone who they would go to, right? Like a healthcare provider that they personally would go to and be very comfortable with. And you have to show that throughout your essay. Okay, but I think that wraps up this essay. And I hope that showed you how you don't necessarily need that personal connection where someone in your family or one of your friends is very ill, right? You don't have to have that component to it. In this essay, she did not have any mention of that. There she talked about her own personal qualities, her love for mysteries, and then she talked about the patients that she encountered while engaging some of these clinical experiences, but that's obviously very different. That's it for this video. I hope that was helpful, and obviously if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave me a comment down below, or you can reach out to me via my email or Instagram, which should both be listed in the description below. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll tune in next time. Thank you.